Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Megan Testani with Red Level. I have my friend Chris Stevenson here from MASCO, and we're here today for the Modern Workplace webinar series. This stemmed from an event that we hosted back in October, where we brought together some of the finest here in Metro Detroit in terms of thought leaderships of people that have started down the path of digital transformation and have started moving towards a modern workplace so that they can enable their employees to be more effective and more efficient. With that said, that is the goal of today's webinar, is to show everybody how you can become a more modern workplace by using the tools and technologies that you may already have or might be interested in taking a look at, and seeing how real companies have actually tackled what can be quite a daunting challenge. Wouldn't you agree, Chris?
Definitely.
So just a little bit about Chris, since he is such a great guy, I appreciate him being here with us today. So Chris Stevenson is an IT business partner with MASCO Corporation. He has led multiple SharePoint migrations and on-prem and to the cloud. He has also developed MASCO's overall Enterprise Office 365 strategy and works closely with the business to cultivate their specific technology roadmaps. Would you say that's about right, Chris?
That sounds about right.
Okay. So then from there, Chris, if you could give us a quick introduction of MASCO. Let us know what MASCO is all about.
Yeah, so MASCO is a global leader in the design, manufacture, and distribution of branded home improvement products. Again, a lot of people maybe haven't heard the name MASCO. It's more of a shareholder brand, if you will, but a lot of the different companies that we own and their products should be familiar to a lot of you. Products like Behr Paint, Delta and Hansgrohe faucets, faucets, bath and shower fixtures. Normally I would reference Kraft Made in Marillac cabinets, but we recently divested those companies, or are in an agreement to. So they're not long for our portfolio. And again, some decorative architecture products as well. And Watkins manufactures spas under various brands, including Hot Springs. So, I mean, really what MASCO is trying to do is leverage these brands across categories to create value for both customers and shareholders. So it's kind of the marketing spiel for MASCO. Internally, what that actually looks like is you've got MASCO Corporate Center, and then we've got about 14 business units. And again, the business units are the ones that are responsible for these brands. From an IT standpoint, it's very decentralized. Each business unit has their own IT department. Many of them have their own CIO, or their IT department reports up through their business unit to the business unit general manager. And then those general managers report to group presidents and ultimately the CEO at MASCO. But from an IT standpoint, it's again, it's a fairly decentralized model. And part of the reason we're like that is we think that the business units should be responsible for the things that differentiate them. So what that means from an IT standpoint is, if they've got specific systems to their product, or specific machines that are specific to what they manufacture, they're going to have better, and they're going to be closer to that, and they're going to have better knowledge of that than we would at a corporate center. And what we're trying to do is figure out what are those commodities that aren't differentiators for the business unit, and how can we start to leverage those at an enterprise scale so that we at MASCO can, again, ultimately provide value to them, our business unit.
So that sounds internally to MASCO, the business driver behind why you guys went down the path of modern workplace and digital transformation.
Yeah, because ultimately in our structure, again, from looking at my IT department standpoint, our customer are the internal users at MASCO Corporate, but also our business unit, and really focused a lot on their IT strategies and enabling them. But you hit it on the head, Megan. trying to leverage our scale.
So now that you've been down this path of digital transformation and moving to a modern workplace, could you get into a bit of what was the process behind getting to where you are currently? So when you started, where did you look for information? What was in who and what was involved? You know, where were you looking for things? What were you trying to accomplish? All of those details.
Yeah, and actually backing up a step for the business drivers, we talk about leveraging our scale, but another thing that we're trying to do specifically with digital transformation is simplify the systems that we provide. And what we're recognizing is that there's a number of point solutions that are deployed throughout the enterprise that are really kind of doing the same functionality, or there's at least significant overlap. We've also got legacy applications that are costly to maintain and reaching end of life. And then there's the obvious, when infrastructure reaches the end of life and that's a huge CapEx investment, how do we justify that when we look at what's going on around us with what's happening in the cloud? So again, a lot of those are very IT centric. Focusing also, again, more on the business side of it that's outside of IT is what we're finding is a lot of the way that we're rolling out content, people are confused. They don't know where to go to find information, and they don't know where to go to share information. And I think, Megan, referencing the event that took place in October, I think it was in Ryan's presentation, he had a slide, a statistic from Gartner that the average employee spends 4 to 8 hours a week searching for information.
Yep.
Which is just kind of mind-boggling when you think about it, how much percentage of our week that is. But so kind of taking that into the process, that's what really was the drive. Again, from the business side, that was the driver. Is how do we reduce this confusion? How do we give people a message and a strategy that's able to articulate to them? This is where you go to do certain things. This is where you go to share with specific audiences. How do we fix that problem? And again, because at the start of this, our current state was, just at MASCO alone, we had 3 different intranets that we were sending people to. And again, that's what drove a lot of the confusion. And ultimately, we weren't leveraging products or solutions that we had available to us. So kind of that's where we started, is focusing on the problem we were trying to solve, which was, again, this problem of confusion. And again, from the IT standpoint, simplification. And then once we looked at that, okay, what tools are available to us? And so specific to Office 365, what we'd already adopted was the Exchange Online platform. So again, early in our digital transformation process, before we started looking at the collaboration tools, we recognized the value of moving our messaging platform off of our on-premises environment and into the cloud. So because of that, we'd already purchased E3 licenses this will come up later, but I just want to create a caveat for all of our North American business units. Europe is in a different, Europe is not part of our Office 365 tenant today, other than getting them in as with guest access. But so from North America standpoint, we were able to leverage Office 365 and consolidate onto one messaging platform for all of our business units. So again, that's a big win right there, but that's kind of a tactical win, because from the end user, they're not really impacted by that. That's really just behind the scenes in IT. But what we weren't doing, and this is part of the simplification problem, is there's this whole other suite of applications that are available to us in Office 365 that we weren't taking advantage of until, again, we started to take a closer look at, again, this problem that we're trying to solve with users not knowing where to go to collaborate or how to collaborate with each other. So again, start by focusing on what the problem was that we were trying to solve, what tools were available to us, and then it was a matter of, well, how do we leverage these tools? How do we roll out these tools in a strategic manner to get the most value out of it? And that's where we kind of, again, a lot of different methods we use to try to discover that. Attending local user groups, which is ultimately how we got connected with Red Level. or CDH at the time, but also Red Level and some other partners. Attended various conferences, like we've got the SharePoint Saturday. I think there's been one in Detroit the last couple of years.
Yep.
And then the SharePoint conferences, various what's it called? The Microsoft Business Application Summit. It was a 2-day event in Atlanta that was really helpful on kind of the Power Apps and Flow side. I put a plug in for that. But ultimately, just kind of having your ear to the ground and trying to understand what other companies are doing, kind of like what we're doing with this session today. Doing your research on the internet and then just getting out to some of these conferences to try to understand where Microsoft is going. Again, through that discovery process, ultimately connecting with a partner like Red Level or CDH that can help us kind of define that strategy and take advantage of, again, an outside party's knowledge to partner with us to kind of help us understand where Microsoft is going and get a picture of that more clearly, because again, with your role, you have your finger on the pulse of where their strategy is going a lot more than what I do in my seat. And be able to leverage a partner for that is great. And also because you have experience of solving problems in so many different areas with other partners. So we see that as, again, a key part of our strategy moving forward.
So quick question in terms of who from MASCO's side of the house was involved in this process. Was it just the IT department? Was it the IT and a couple of strategic partners for the business side of it? How did you make sure that this initiative was not just going to be rolled out, but rolled out and used?
So it definitely was not just IT. And I think if it was, it would have failed, or I think that's kind of how we got into the state we were in with 3 different intranets and all of the confusion, because IT owned it and it started to look like IT. And again, that's where everybody gets confused, because IT is part of the business, but obviously I think we'd all agree we think a little different than a lot of the rest of the business. So it's very important to have that connection. And for us, this initiative was actually, I would say, certain parts of it were definitely led by our corporate communications group, which is a part of our HR department. But corporate communications is really the one that saw this problem even before IT did, and ultimately engaged with us to say, hey, we've got to do something about this, because right now, again, that going back to that statistic of 4 to 8 hours searching for information each week, I don't want to hazard a guess to what that would look like at MASCO, and again, in a lot of ways, maybe still does. But yeah, it was definitely partnering with our communications department, and again, converging with them to tackle this problem. And they really did a lot of the work on the business side to initiate the conversations and have the dialogue with other departments about where they were struggling and what they were trying to accomplish. And we were able to, again, be involved in those conversations as well, and get involved in solving those problems.
Okay. So how did you execute on this plan? How did you approach your digital transformation? What made it so successful for you at MASCO?
So I think some of the things we've already talked about, like number one, defining the problem. And again, we've kind of defined it from both the business standpoint with the end user confusion. We've defined it from the IT standpoint, which is, again, usually around cost. I'm also going to say it's around simplification here. So we've established the problem. The second step we just talked about, which is, again, identifying the business owners, or again, even better in our situation, the business owners identifying the need themselves and engaging with us proactively. So again, getting that buy-in from the business, or having really a key driver there. The next was to try to define what is it that we need to, what solution can we apply to solve the problem. And that happened through a lot of dialogue with the various departments in our building. A lot of it came from the strategy from communications of what they saw as like the key functionality that we needed to implement to try to tie everything together. Mm-hmm. And again, just walking through it, that thing was global navigation. in our current intranet, which was based in SharePoint on premises, the 19, not the 19 version, the 2013 version. We aren't going back that far. But SharePoint 2013 was the version we were on premises, and it was if you're familiar with SharePoint on-prem, at the time there was nothing to tie site collection navigation together out of the box. And in our environment, and taking a step back, our on-premise environment, we're hosting a SharePoint web application, not just for MASCO. We're also hosting either specific site collections or web applications for 5 of our other business units. So it was really a shared environment. And in that environment, just in MASCO's content, there were 130 site collections. So if you think about where we were storing content at that time, there's nothing that tied any of those 130 site collections together. We had an intranet landing page or a portal page where we had a navigation structure that tied them together on that one page. But as soon as you would navigate away from that root site collection or that home site collection, you're into a completely different navigation structure, a completely different look and feel, depending on how that site owner created their content or organized their content. There's no consistency. There's nothing that tied everything together. And again, so people would bookmark links, and then somebody would leave, and then the person that came in didn't know about the bookmarked link and would create a new resource, and all of a sudden we've got site sprawl and we've got duplication of content. Again, I'm kind of getting back to the problem now. I need to step forward. But ultimately, global navigation is one of the things that our corporate communications manager identified as a table stake, a must-have for our intranet, or really to solve the confusion problem. A few other table stakes that we know that we needed to define were people need to have one place to go to find news, to find events, to find their tools and applications, again, which can be things that are outside of Office 365 or intranet, things like Workday, our HR system, and our expense reporting system, et cetera. And then again, the resources, which are kind of like the information about each department and some of their documentation. So we really established as a baseline, those were the things that we needed to be successful. Then we went about evaluating, okay, what options do we have to meet this criteria? Mm-hmm. And at the start of this, Office 365 and SharePoint Online wasn't something we were looking at. Our mentality at the start was, well, we've got this SharePoint on-prem environment, we've got a lot invested into it, we've got the knowledge of it, and we really don't know anything about SharePoint Online, and they're changing things every 2 weeks, and we aren't ready for that. And so it really wasn't on our radar. But as we started to evaluate options and understand the full scope of what not just SharePoint Online, but what Office 365 could do, we realized that we had an opportunity not just to create a new intranet, but really to, promote tools that can solve business problems, again, outside of just SharePoint, like Teams and OneDrive for Business. So kind of putting that on the back burner, the immediate, how do we get this global navigation? We started to look at, well, maybe we can build something internally using the SharePoint framework. And we discovered Valo. I think specifically through a SharePoint user group session, it was introduced or it was talked about. Once we saw that, and again, Valo is a lot more than global navigation, but again, that was the key piece of functionality that we were laser focused on. We decided to purchase a Valo intranet solution to kind of sit on top of SharePoint Online and use that to drive really our strategy around our intranet. But again, it's also kind of the centerpiece of our digital transformation strategy. My time might be a little off, but before we purchased Valo, we also sat down and had a strategy session with what was CDH at the time. And again, doing a lot of the things that we've already talked about. Try to understand where Microsoft's roadmap is going. Try to understand what other companies are doing, and really kind of understand how they see these tools playing in Office 365, and then kind of trying to meld that with what MASCO's culture is, and try to mesh that with what we think would work in our culture or problems that we're seeing, and really trying to take those two things, what Microsoft is doing and what, again, CDH's experience had showed them from other companies, with the uniqueness of what MASCO was, and then how do we meld that together. And it was a really great session, and I'll give you some quick things that came out that maybe weren't expected at the time. Microsoft Teams is part of our strategy now. Going into that session, we kind of viewed Teams as just one more tool, just one more place to send people. But what we really recognized out of that session is Teams is a strategic application for Microsoft, and can and should be for our business based on where they're taking it and what the intended audience and what the intended tone of the communication that goes on there. So we ultimately adopted that into our strategy. One of the big areas of pushback where MASCO, I think, differs from the way Microsoft is promoting their tools is this concept of news. Microsoft's got the concept of news where news can come from any site, and it will roll up into a top-level site at your hub root, or it can really be surfaced in many different places throughout what they're describing as the intelligent intranet. With our culture here, that really wasn't our model. These news sources at MASCO aren't going to be varied. We have, again, a formal communications department, and that's really where we want all of the communication that goes out, all of these news posts that go out, need to come from that one group. And they already have processes built whereby other departments or business units will come to them to share information and have them create those news posts for them. Again, because they're creating things that are not just internal, but also press releases for shareholders and things like that. So that was one of the areas where we really had a lot of great discussion around, this is kind of what Microsoft is pushing, but that doesn't meet MASCO's need, because from a communication or from a news standpoint, we have much more of a top-down approach than what they're targeting their solution at. So again, I try to share those things because I think those are concrete, real-world things that we had to work through to try to figure out what fit best for MASCO, not what fit best for what Microsoft is going, or what CDH is seeing, but what actually fit best for MASCO. And again, we were really able to uncover that in that session.
And it's absolutely key to understand that for anybody that's going through this, is understanding what your own needs are and how those can be met by whatever tool sets that you're working with.
Yeah, and so those are some of the kind of the little things that came out of that you might not have expected. The things that you may have expected, where we really defined a strategy for, again, what are the strategic applications that are in Office 365, and how are we going to market this to our end users, and how are we going to get buy-in? And really the three applications we identified are OneDrive for Business, obviously SharePoint Online, that's what we've been talking quite a bit about, and Microsoft Teams. And again, it's pretty intuitive if you're familiar with those tools, but we identified OneDrive is where all of your personal work files should go, and the tone of the communication through OneDrive is informal, or it could be formal. I mean, a lot of it's, if you think about it being scoped at a personal level, maybe you think, well, it doesn't really make sense. You're saying I'm communicating with myself. Well, yes, but you also have the ability to share files both inside and outside of the company. Mm-hmm. So where we see this as a strategic application is we had specifically purchased products like FTP style products for allowing sharing of files outside of the company. We were able to, again, do away with those solutions once we started to adopt OneDrive. So again, OneDrive is for personal work files, but sharing is a major component of that. And again, all the synchronization capabilities that we're just starting to tap into. SharePoint is really your public audience. It's public internal content. It's more formal in tone. And again, that's where what we talked about, where the news posts that come out are coming from a centralized corporate communications office. And again, we've identified that what goes into SharePoint has a formal tone. And again, it's the general information that you're trying to share about your organization or your department or your team for the rest of the, again, public internal audience to consume. Microsoft Teams, on the other hand, is much more informal in tone. And it's really targeted at, private groups or smaller groups of people that are either on the same team or on the same project, where everybody has access to edit all of the content. And it's really more of that kind of collaboration space. But like I said, what we really try to stress is the tone of the communication that goes into each of these buckets. And again, just the SharePoint being formal, Teams being more informal. And that being said, there's always going to be gray areas, right? There's going to be gray areas where there's a request that comes in for a certain type of resource or collaboration that doesn't fit neatly into one of these buckets. And then you just look at that specific use case and try to analyze, where's the best place to put it and choose a spot. So we recognize that there's going to be gray areas in the strategy that we're going to have to work through as we go, because not everything fits nicely into the buckets that we want to create.
Never does.
Yeah, but really, again, there's for your organization, it might be different, but for our organization, these are the three that we identified as being the most strategic and the most important for us to get launched, because we feel that they establish a baseline for us in Office 365 around how we do content management and the life cycle of how identifying how documents kind of travel between these three content management solutions or parts of the content management solution. Kind of skipping ahead, like one of the things we're looking at now is Stream. There's been a lot of need for, video sharing in our environment lately, and Stream wasn't something that we knew it was there, but it was something that we kind of put on the back burner to focus on these projects. And now we're starting to look at that a little more deeply and try to identify how to weave that in. So, it's going to evolve over time, but that was the baseline that we started with, and it's really gotten us off to a great start in our journey.
So through this process and through the execution of it, what have been some of the key learnings that you've experienced? Is there some ahas or any of those, gotchas, like, wouldn't want to do that again?
So a few things I would say, and again, the first one we've kind of already talked about is it's very important to have the rest of the business engaged or to have a partner on the business side. Digital transformation isn't an IT thing, it's a business thing. And again, IT has a very strategic role and a very important role in it, but ultimately it's the business that has to drive that. And again, that was really the foundation of our strategy, is that it all starts with whatever the business context is of what problem they're trying to solve, and grow it from there. Another lesson learned is, I'm going to use this term, we're going to call it intranet in a box here. And the process that we went through to take our intranet from our SharePoint on-prem 2013 environment and move that up into, SharePoint Online with Valo. Again, it wasn't just deploying the technology. There was a lot of, again, work on the business side that went through it, a lot of conversations. And through that, what we tried to boil that down to was, okay, these are the procedures and these are the decisions that you have to make on how you want to organize your content. These are more of like the business side of things that has to be determined. And we partnered those processes with the actual, I would say the technical work that needed to be done, which was migrating of content, creating new site collections, wiring them up to Valo. There's a set of technical things that had to be done, and there's a set of business processes that had to be gone through. We packaged all that up and called it intranet in a box. And I guess the lesson learned here is that whatever you're doing, try to make it scalable. And that's where we've had a lot of success, because we were able to take that, and through the conversations and through reaching out, what we realized is that a lot of our business units had the same problem that we were having at MASCO. Confusion about, I don't know where to go to find content. Our intranet isn't effective. I don't know where to store documents. I don't know where to store content to share it with people. And so along the way, as we were on this journey, what we recognized is, hey, we can take the solution that we came up with and we can package that up and hand it to a business unit and let them use that same solution to solve their problem. And so again, we call that intranet in a box, and that's one of the key takeaways is we've been able to now take the problem that we solve and help other business units solve the same problem and ultimately drive value for them as well. This one hits a little closer to home, but the modern version of SharePoint is much easier for end users and power users to manage. And I kind of chuckle when I say that because I think, with my background coming out of, a SharePoint admin and developer background, one of the things that was always a struggle was this mythical power user that was going to manage their own site collection, or even their own site. We never really saw very many of those. They were kind of a unicorn. SharePoint on-prem, it was very difficult, or SharePoint Classic, I should say, it was very difficult for end users to be able to manage their own permissions on a site. Mm-hmm. Even to this day, it's probably still the number one call that we get from the power users or site owners is, I need to add somebody, or how do I remove somebody, or, these specific sharing requests. So managing the permissions is very difficult in Classic. And even the concept of how you're adding web parts to a page and all of the different page refreshes and screens that you have to work through. What we've found is with very little training, the site owners that we had identified were able to pick up managing their own site pretty easily. We did provide some training. We provided some one-on-one hands-on training and some more formal training, but ultimately what we found is it's much easier for them to adopt the modern version of SharePoint because they've modernized it. And some of the biggest pain points we have are, again, how do we manage permissions? Well, now all from the home screen with the advent of this information panel, they can manage all of that right from one page, and they're having a much easier time managing their sites, which is great for us because we're seeing a lot less calls about that now to our help desk or into our SharePoint team. So again, that maybe seemed like a very specific lesson learned, but again, that was a learning for us. We've already talked about engaging with the business first and trying to help them reach their goal. Another thing I would say along those lines is to over-communicate. We did have some missteps along the way where we might have moved some things or rolled some things out and didn't communicate that well enough. Some people were caught off guard or caught in the dark, and that led to some conflicts that we had to work through. But again, I think a really key piece of this is how you communicate to the rest of the organization what you're doing. And again, the most important part is the why of what you're doing and how it's going to benefit them. And again, staying focused on the problem that you're trying to solve once you identify it. Some of those things that we did try to communicate about the benefit are things that you'd have heard probably in any digital transformation talk. And again, enabling your future workforce. The future workforce is anticipating an environment where they can do their work anytime, anywhere, from any device. And really, that's the message that we're trying to communicate to our end users, is we're trying to enable them where they're at with our solutions. So, kind of running down my list.
Pretty good thing going.
Yeah, it's been pretty successful so far. Just looking at some of our results, a few statistics, and then some anecdotal things. So I mentioned the intranet in a box a moment ago. Mm-hmm. In 2019, so we rolled that out in October of 2018. Over the course of 2019, we were able to kind of use intranet in a box and deploy that at 4 different business units, and help them, again, solve some of the same problems, and even some problems that we didn't have that they have that solution helped solve. So again, the ability to scale that and replicate it, that was a big win for us. And we've got 2 more that we're currently talking with and trying to help get that going. And again, when we say intranet in a box, we kind of mean that in that this shouldn't take months and months to get going. I think most of these Internet in the Box projects that we did with business units this year took probably on average like 2-3 months tops. One of them was able to get going in a matter of weeks because they had some executive drivers that were really pushing it.
That seems like a huge efficiency for the business line.
Yeah. So again, being able to leveraging the scale, leveraging best practices, leveraging the value that we got out of the solution. And like I said, we're in talks with 2 more right now, and we plan to engage with at least 2 more in 2020. Looking at our adoption
roadmap.
I'm sorry, say it again.
So that is part of your future roadmap. What else would be on that roadmap?
Yeah, so part of where we're at right now is we still have some legacy content in our on-prem environment. So we've moved the intranet and what I call all of our vanilla content, all like the basic SharePoint blocking and tackling content. What we still have left are, over the course of the last, 12 years or so, we did a lot of customizations in our on-prem environment, using tools like InfoPath, using tools like SharePoint Designer, using Visual Studio, state machine workflows, and event receivers and things like that can't easily be moved to the cloud. So again, our strategy with Internet in the Box is to take all of the things that were specific to the intranet or that were just plain SharePoint content and migrate that up into SharePoint Online. 2020, we're going to be focused on completely shutting down that on-premise environment or on-prem environment, and that should result in a significant cost savings for us, as well as a significant savings in the amount of resources that we have in terms of personnel hours that are required to manage that. So again, personally, I'm pretty excited about getting rid of that environment. It's been my baby for a long time, but I'll be sad to see it go, but I'll also be celebrating once we're fully off that environment. And like I said, continuing to help the business units adopt SharePoint Online. OneDrive for Business, again, it's something that's been available, and we've used it in strategic places with different teams. We're now, for lack of a better term, mandating that be the storage location from our IT department. And so we've just gone through a series of trainings in-house and getting our user base up to date on that, and really established that as part of our technology platform. And so rolling out OneDrive for Business, again, I say rolling out lightly because everybody already has it. It's more of an education rollout and getting people to understand what it is and how to use it and why to use it, and to drive adoption there. So that's what we're doing in kind of Q3, Q4. Well, we're in Q4 now. We started that in Q3. We'll probably be working on that into 2020. And probably the biggest one is converting from Skype for Business to Teams in Q3 of 2020 on our roadmap. We've got, right now we're using Teams to target strategic projects. So I mentioned that was part of our strategy. We started with SharePoint Online. We've also recognized there's a number of kind of individual spots where we could plug Teams in to meet a need. We've been doing that along the way. But again, later on in 2020, we plan to really drive the adoption of Teams because it's going to replace Skype for Business. Mm-hmm. In Microsoft's roadmap, I think, Megan, what were you saying? That was in June of 2021?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's, again, Skype is something that we've used pretty heavily here from a communication standpoint. And again, we want to kind of be out in front of that and have our business prepared for that. And again, we're looking to move on that in 2020 as well.
Okay. So before I ask you for one last question, I just want to let everybody know, if you have any additional questions for Chris, feel free to put them into the questions tab. But Chris, one last question for you. In one sentence, what advice do you have for those in the audience that are going through their digital transformation?
I would say identify the business problem that you're trying to solve, and then look at the technology that's available to you to help solve that, and see how you can partner with your business to enable that.
Wow.
That's all I'm going to say because it was a one sentence.
Great job.
We could probably talk for another hour about that, but we'll honor the question and keep it at one sentence.
Okay. So we did have a question come in for you. Do you limit who can create groups and teams?
So that's actually part of what we're using Valo for. Part of the Valo Internet suite of tools, there's a tool called Teamwork 2.0. And what it does is it allows you to basically create an order process for teams and for Office 365 groups. It's one of the things that we haven't really talked about yet, Megan, is governance. Mm-hmm. And kind of the way that we're approaching governance is Office 365 continues to evolve. We're not going to be able to spend 6 months coming up with a governance strategy and write it down in stone and have that be our governance strategy. Our governance strategy has to be progressive because the tools are progressive. That doesn't mean you don't have a governance strategy, but where we're at MASCO is we're right now allowing anybody to create teams in Office 365 groups. But what we're doing is we're funneling them into this Teamwork 2.0 application that's a part of Valo. Again, the term we use is to order that resource rather than create that resource. It's essentially the same thing, but ultimately it depends on your business's culture or your IT department's culture. There's enabling the business to create the resources that they need when they need them versus the need for IT to have control and to have their kind of hands around what's being created in their environment. And how you balance that is going to depend on your culture and what your needs are. We've kind of taken a more flexible approach, and we're using, like I said, Teamwork 2.0. In the workflow around Teamwork 2.0, you can put approvals in place so that, again, somebody has to get an IT approval before it generates the team for them. Again, we're choosing not to do that, ultimately because what we found in our environment is the more rigid we are, the more that we restrict that, the more people tend to find other workarounds or other solutions because there's, quite frankly, maybe not they don't have a lot of confidence in IT to meet their needs. So when they see IT kind of pop up as a barrier, a lot of times they'll go try to find their own solution. And I think that's the kind of environment that's led to, well, the buzzword for it is shadow IT. Mm-hmm. But I think what we have more of a problem in our organization is individual departments going out and purchasing point solutions to solve their problems that then IT is required on to support in some way. So again, our approach is more flexible, but yeah, the specific answer to the question is, yes, we're allowing anybody to create that, but again, we're kind of forcing them to use our process to do it, so that way we can at least be aware of what's going on in our environment.
Okay. Another question that came in, how does Red Level help MASCO in understanding the user requirement and explain the advantages or disadvantages of the SharePoint modern architecture?
So how does Red Level help us do that? Ultimately, the strategy session that we referenced a couple of years ago, the reference that was in 2018 actually, mm-hmm. that was with what I would say our end user or our business. That was not just an IT conversation. That was a conversation with our communications department as well. And we've also had them engage with other end users, if you will, from other departments to kind of talk about that strategy. So I would say a bulk of the communication we do comes through us, but it's where we saw the value from. Again, I'm conflating Red Level and CDH as being the same thing because, well, they are the same thing now. So if I mix up the terms there, I apologize. But really, the value they provide is, again, knowing what's going on in the industry, and not just at a theoretical level, but at a practical level because they've done it, right? Again, an example would be like I talked about governance a second ago. We're engaging with Red Level in January to talk about the next step in our governance model, how we can leverage more of Teamwork 2.0 to request more types of resources. Not just Office 365 groups, SharePoint sites, and Teams. What about a Power BI workspace, and also talk about, okay, the other aspect of governance, not just how does content get in, but how does that content get cleaned up? As people, how do we clean up dead teams? How do we clean up dead sites? How do we have a process that's automated in place to take care of that? So again, I think where red level we're using more on a strategic level for defining the strategy for our digital transformation. We're not doing as much as having them interact with their end users, but leveraging the experience they have on having, again, their successful projects that they've done at many different companies versus, me personally, I've been at MASCO for 14 years. I can get out and talk to people in user groups and different things, but Red Level has experience in implementing solutions at a lot of different companies, some that look like MASCO, some that don't. They've seen things that have failed. They've also seen things that have been successful. And so it's them having all of that type of knowledge, I think that is what adds value for me, who's kind of, I don't want to put it as a negative because I'm happy to have been here for 14 years, but almost a little bit siloed in the fact that I've worked for one organization that long. So I think it's a great offset to what I bring to the table internally, what they bring to the table from their experiences. I think there's more parts to that question that I didn't answer. I don't know if Megan, can you refresh me on that?
Absolutely. So the full question, let's see, how does Red Level help MASCO in understanding the user requirements? And it is very long, so I'm having a hard time reading all of it. So give me 1 second. How does CDH Red Level help MASCO in understanding the user requirement and explain the advantages or disadvantages of the SharePoint modern architecture?
Okay, so it sounds like I didn't really answer the question at all. Let me back up then. The other way, so user requirement. So one of the other ways that we've used Red Level, not just for these strategy sessions, which are where I find the most value, is also, so we reference some of the work that we still have left to do is migrating content or migrating custom solutions from our on-prem environment to our SharePoint Online environment, or really to our Office 365 environment, because it may be other tools like Power Apps and Flow that ultimately are the right solution. In our experience, Red Level's taken an Agile approach with us, where it's like we'll bring them in to kind of target one of these custom solutions. And once they look at that custom solution, they'll sit down, with myself or another IT person in the room with the business customer that owns the process, and really just start to map out the user stories. And again, once those user stories are mapped out, then kind of trying to refine that into a statement of work, and then refine that further into the sprints that are going to be involved in creating those backlogs. So from what I've seen, and again, we've worked with other partners doing that as well. But that's, as far as user requirements gathering, it's getting Red Level in the room with us and our business users to try to create those user stories that are going to drive the sprint to begin to refactor, create new processes. The pros and the cons of SharePoint Modern. I'm going to use an analogy hopefully people can relate to. I think I saw a meme on the internet a while ago that had showed Linux and a picture of like a fighter pilot cockpit. It showed Windows, and it was basically the inside of, or the driver's seat of an automobile. And then it showed Apple or Mac, and it showed basically a toy plastic steering wheel for a baby. And I think the point of showing those three things was, Linux, you can do everything and configure everything. Windows, you can still do a lot, but it's a lot more streamlined. In Mac, they lock everything down and you get what you get, right? I would apply that to SharePoint Modern. In SharePoint on-premise, you ran into a problem that you couldn't solve. Guess what? You've got the server-side object model. If you know some C#, you can solve whatever problem you want. I don't want to call it the Wild West, but you had a lot more opportunity to configure a lot more components. In SharePoint Online, because you're now in the cloud-hosted model, a lot of the things that you were able to do in an on-premise environment have been abstracted away from you. And that and again, it requires you to learn a new development model if you want to be able to do some of the same things, specifically the SharePoint framework, which I found from my kind of, for lack of a classic developer training or background using, .NET and C#, moving into this environment where you're using Node.js and you're using React and some of these different tools, it was quite a big jump for me. But that's how I would describe it, as if SharePoint on-prem is kind of like the Linux cockpit where you get Visual Studio and the world is yours to create, SharePoint Online is a lot more closer to the plastic steering wheel that is Apple, where you have a lot less ability to do those types of customization. I'm going to say that that's both the plus and the minus. Like, again, as an administrator or as a developer, it feels a lot more limiting, but there's a purpose behind that. Because, again, the reason I'm in the position I'm in, or that we're in the position we're in at MASCO, is because we did all of those customizations. So we've got a ton of work to do to refactor that. InfoPath still has a few years left of life, but let's face it, it died at least 6 years ago, and we're still leveraging it and getting value out of it, but that can't last forever. So again, with the way that SharePoint Modern is progressively updated, all of the time by Microsoft, and the way that the interface is responsive and mobile friendly, I think those are positives about SharePoint Modern that make it worth it for us to give up the kind of total control that we had in the on-premise environment. Again, that's the decision that we made at MASCO. Again, part of that is one of our strategies specific to our IT department is simplification. Do we really need to make this customization because the end user asked for it? Is it really something that they need, or is it just something that they want? And what is the actual value of making that customization? And so we're looking at those types of things with a lot more scrutiny and trying to assign more value assessments to those rather than just being a yes man kind of department.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Well, hopefully it did. We are about out of time, so I want to take just a second to say thank you again to Chris Stevenson from MASCO. I appreciate your perspectives on digital transformation and your move to the modern workplace. It was great having you over at the Modern Workplace Summit. It's been great having you on today's Modern Workplace webinar. And oh, hang on one second. One more question came in. Oh, just a thanks, Chris. I do.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yep. So again, thank you. Have a great day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Megan. Appreciate it.